Etta James arrived at Allen Toussaint's studio on Rampart Street in New Orleans an hour early one morning in the spring of 1972 and stood in the hallway outside the studio door for 10 minutes, listening to a voice she had never heard before. The studio was supposed to be empty. She stood at the door until the song finished. Then she turned the handle and walked in. Allen Toussaint's studio in 1972 was one of the working centers of New Orleans music, a place where sessions ran on a schedule that accommodated the rhythm of a city that approached the beginning of the day differently from Chicago or New York, where the morning often belonged to the administrative work of preparation and the music gathered itself slowly toward the afternoon and evening. Etta James had come in the morning for a pre-session conversation with Toussaint about the material she was planning to record, had come early because she preferred to arrive in rooms before they were fully operational, before the machinery of the session was running, because the room in that state told her things the room in full session mode did not. She had a key to the building from her previous work there. She let herself in. She walked down the hallway toward the studio door and heard the voice through it before she reached it. She stopped walking. The voice was a young woman's voice, a soprano with a specific quality in the middle register that she registered immediately as unusual, not in the sense of strange, but in the sense of rare. A tone that had not yet been shaped by the practices that training imposes, that was operating on instinct and impulse and the specific freedom of someone who did not know they were being heard. She was singing something Etta James did not recognize, not a known song, possibly something she was working on, possibly something entirely improvised. A melody that moved through the changes of a slow progression with the organic ease of someone for whom the music was not a performance, but a conversation with herself. Etta James stood at the door and listened. She stood there for 10 minutes because the voice asked for 10 minutes. It asked for them the way that rare things ask for the attention they deserve, not by demanding it, but simply by continuing to exist at a level that makes leaving feel like a loss. She listened to the full arc of whatever the young woman was doing, listened to it develop and shift and find its way through the middle of the material and arrive somewhere different from where it had started. And she understood as she listened that she was hearing a voice that did not yet know what it had. Not because the voice was unformed, because the voice was operating entirely outside the context of assessment, outside the frame of whether it was good, whether it was good enough, whether it was the kind of voice that could do something in the world. It was singing because singing was the right thing to be doing in an empty room in the morning, and for no other reason. That quality, the quality of music made without the awareness of being evaluated, made purely for the making, was something Etta James had not heard in a long time. Not because she did not encounter good voices. She encountered them regularly. But she rarely encountered a good voice that was operating without the specific self-consciousness that the knowledge of being heard produces. Most voices in the context she moved in were, by necessity, performing for an audience, or a producer, or a recording machine, or simply for the imagined listener that a singer carries in their head after years of professional work. The voice through the door was not performing for anyone. It did not know it had an audience. That absence of performance was what made it exceptional. After 10 minutes, she turned the handle. The door opened. The singing stopped. A young woman, Sarah, who was 20 years old and had been a student of one of the local vocal teachers, and had been given a key to the practice room by a friend of a friend, was standing at the far end of the room near the piano, her hand on the instrument as if she had been using it for the melody, looking at the door with the specific expression of someone caught in a private act. Not embarrassed exactly, waiting to understand what the situation was. Etta James said, "Do not stop." Sarah said, Etta James said, "Do not stop on my account." She walked to the couch along the wall and sat down. She said, "Finish it." Sarah looked at her. She said, "I do not know if I can." "Not with—" She gestured at Etta James, unable to complete the sentence. Etta James said, "You are not doing it for me. You are doing it for the room. The room has not changed. Do it for the room." Sarah turned back to the piano. She found the melody again. It took a moment, 30 seconds of hesitation, her hand on the keys, her voice not yet committed. Then she found it. She sang. Not at the full version she had been at before. The awareness of being heard had changed it, had introduced a layer of self-consciousness that had not been there 10 minutes before. But it was still the melody. It was still, underneath the altered performance, the same voice doing the same thing. Etta James listened. When it ended, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have been told something about your voice that is not true." Sarah looked at her. Etta James said, "I do not know what it was specifically. I do not know who told you. But something in the way you stopped when I came in. There is a specific kind of stopping that happens when someone has been told that what they are doing is not quite right, that the voice is not quite enough, that it needs to be corrected before it can be presented. You stopped that way." Sarah said nothing. Etta James said, "The way you were singing before I came in, the version I heard through the door, that is the voice. That is the correct version. The one you gave me when you knew I was here is also fine, but it is the managed version. It is the voice with the information about whether it is enough already built in." He said, "When you sing alone, you take that out. That is when it is most completely what it is." Sarah said, "They told me the top register was thin." Etta James said, "Whose top register?" She named the teacher. Etta James said, "What I heard through the door was not thin. It was different from what he is used to hearing. There is a difference." She said, "Do not let someone correct what is different out of you before you know what it is for." She said it without intensity, not as a speech, not as an encouragement intended to inspire. She said it the way she said things that she believed, plainly, with the specific authority of someone who has operated in the music long enough to know the difference between a voice being refined and a voice being reduced. She said, "You can take instruction about technique. That is different from instruction about what the voice fundamentally is. Know the difference before you lose the second one trying to improve the first." Sarah sat with that for the rest of the spring. She went back to her teacher for several months and then stopped. Not because the instruction was bad, but because she had begun to hear, in each correction, whether it was the first kind or the second. She found a different teacher the following year who worked on the first and left the second alone. She performed in New Orleans for the next decade, not at a scale that produced a national reputation, but at the scale of someone who had kept the voice intact and who gave it to rooms that needed it, and who knew when she stood at a microphone, the difference between the version that was performing and the version that simply was. What Etta James gave Sarah in that room was not encouragement in the sense that encouragement is usually given, not the reassurance that you are good, that you should keep going, that things will work out. She gave her something more specific and more durable than that, a vocabulary for what was happening to her voice inside the process of instruction. She gave her the distinction between refinement and reduction, which is the distinction that every performer who survives the training process with their essential quality intact has learned to make, and which most performers are never explicitly taught, because the people doing the teaching are not always aware they are doing both at once. The instruction that reduces is usually instruction that is technically correct and stylistically narrow. It produces voices that fit the category the teacher recognizes and are smaller than the voice that arrived. Etta James had watched this happen to voices throughout her career. She had survived something adjacent to it in her own training, had survived it not because anyone had explicitly protected her from it, but because the music she was performing in the Chitlin circuit was not a context that had room for the managed voice, that required the full thing every night and did not give the singer the option of offering the trimmed version instead. The circuit had protected her essential quality through the simple brutality of requiring it. Sarah did not have the circuit. She had a teacher and a practice room and a morning. That was enough. Etta James had been in the hallway. She spoke about that morning once to a musician she trusted. She said, "Etta James came in while I was singing and sat down and told me not to stop. I stopped anyway for a moment. Then I kept going." She said, "She told me something about my voice that my teacher had never told me." She said, "The most important thing she said was that there is a difference between the voice being refined and the voice being reduced." She said, "I had not known that before. I know it now. I know it every time I sing." The voice through the door on a spring morning in New Orleans in 1972 was a voice that had not yet been told what it was. The person in the room who heard it through the door had spent 17 years learning what her own voice was, learning it through sessions and circuits and recording studios, and the accumulated weight of every room that had required the full thing from her. She had earned the right to hear a voice through a door and know the difference between what was there and what was at risk of being taken away. She went in and she said what she heard. That is the transaction. That is all it was. A singer hears another singer through a door, comes in, tells the truth about what she heard. The truth was useful. That is enough to make it worth telling. That is enough to make it one of the things that matters, not the shows, not the chart positions, not the industry recognition, but the morning in an empty room when someone told a young woman the difference between refining a voice and reducing one. The morning when someone said, "Do not let them correct what is different out of you before you know what it is for." Subscribe to Etta James, The Untold Stories. Every day we find the rooms behind the music, the conversations nobody recorded, the moments that made everything else possible. The comment section is open. Tell us which story you want us to find next. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.